Welcome to this edition of Fuel for Thought. I'm Mark Rechtin, Executive Editor of S&P Global Mobility. In today's episode, we'll be looking at the U.S. light vehicle market, the vehicle supply and consumer demand forces at work at the beginning of 2023, and how American car shopping habits may have changed for the good with the pandemic. For those of you missing the dulcet tones of regular host Kristen Balasia, our Vice President of Advisory Services, you are in luck, as she is my guest this morning, along with Joe Kyriakoza, Vice President and General Manager of Automotive Marketing Services here at S&P Global Mobility, as well as Grant Gitre, Associate Director of Consulting. Good morning, all.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mark.
Morning, Mark.
Okay. So before we get into how the retail market is changing from a holistic point of view, let's look at current consumer market conditions as 2023 gets rolling. We've had 2 years of supply-constrained inventories on dealer showrooms, which has meant a much higher transaction price for those consumers who need a car today. Kristen, how about you bring us up to speed regarding what we're seeing recently in terms of advertised vehicle inventories? Are they returning to traditional levels?
Absolutely. Great question. Traditional levels, that's an interesting term these days, right? So what folks generally are hearing is true. And while what we're seeing at the start of the year and the end of last year is generally positive news, I think it's important that we look back for a moment, even just to July of 2022, where we ended a 35-month period with year-over-year inventory declines. 35 months, right? That's nuts in an industry where we've spent decades managing inventory, looking every week and every month and hoping it's not getting too high, right? So to your question more specifically, broadly, general inventory levels, dealer advertised inventory has been growing steadily. There's no other way to describe these numbers than it's up significantly year over year, even month over month, with the end of January 23 seeing an increase of 2.9%, about 46,000 units over last month. So we're at a total of about 1.6 million units or 37 days supply. And we've increased year over year about 66% or almost 650,000 units. We're expecting this to grow, which is great. Seeing this continued strong growth path with year-over-year increases. We're expecting that by about mid this year, we should be 70 to 85% above last year, reaching about 2 million units by the end of the year. But what we like to say, Mark, is the devil's always in the details. So if you look a little bit deeper into the brand level, you see, folks like GM and Ford with significant inventory volume increases in Q4. And then the share of dealer advertised inventory, that story is always really interesting as well. And the things that would stand out would be things like Toyota, down 3 points year over year in regards to advertised inventory share. And the other brand that stands out that I'd reference would be Nissan. They're up about 2.2 points year over year, and they're starting to move ahead from an advertised dealer inventory of both Ram and Honda in the advertised dealer share. So bottom line, inventory is returning in a real and meaningful way to traditional levels, as you initially said. I think that's yet to be seen what the industry will define as the new traditional level. And that's probably a topic for a whole nother podcast.
Okay, so a quick follow-up to that, Kristen. Does this mean retail asking prices are coming down? Are the days of dealer add-ons to MSRP over? Does the consumer have negotiating power once again?
So I think we're on the cusp of that, right? So, and again, I go back to it's going to be brand and market specific. So while we're seeing, I'll say, a whopping average transaction price of 49,500 at the end of the year in December, we know this is largely due to the historically low inventory levels, right? So as inventory returns, there's more talk about loyalty efforts, conquest opportunities, and manufacturers and dealers will start to get some level of concern. With the flip side being those macro considerations that are spurring those dreaded, demand destruction concerns. So as we talked about earlier with the inventory situation continuing to improve, more vehicle availability and choice, to stimulate some demand, incentive levels are likely to increase. However, still varies by manufacturer. So you look at GM, Ford, Stellantis approaching their normalized inventory levels, while others continue to have more pressure or struggle. That'll allow them to have stronger pricing power for an extended period of time, which everyone will try and hold on to. New vehicle pricing, as you asked, kind of getting to the core of the question there, it's a cycle. So with low to almost zero in some cases inventory, you're going to see really high pricing. Most recently I saw We're looking at average monthly payments on a new vehicle of $770 and used monthly payments at $550 when, 550 used to be more the new vehicle norm, and that's the used. So when there's no inventory, there's no incentives. And the vehicles being produced and prioritized that we've seen are the high-end trim models, further inflating those prices. I think the OEMs are going to have to come out and start building, vehicles that people can afford. And as there's more choices, they'll have more pressure to do that. um, it certainly, will influence their pricing and incentive strategies. But again, I think they'll be looking closely at, competitive brands, regions, consumer responses to these prices that in some cases the industry, both consumers and the OEMs, have gotten used to. They're not going to want to lose that too quickly, but they're also not going to want to lose any sales. So, I guess in a nutshell, I think it'll be bumpy as manufacturers and dealers find their way or that sweet spot and balance maintaining or growing market share while managing their profitability, while being still subject to many factors outside of their control.
Yeah, I think it might all come down to who blinks first to set it all off.
Yes.
And part of that has to do with, during the pandemic, our data analysis here at S&P Global Mobility, it showed a clear correlation between a lack of inventories on dealer lots and dipping consumer loyalty. So I'll throw it to you, Joe. Now that inventories are coming back, do you think old loyalties will come back as well? And what do brands need to do to conquest those defectors who wandered off to a rival?
Yeah, loyalty has been a very extensive topic over the last few years just because of all of the challenges that the industry has seen and the challenges that have been posed to consumers, starting with COVID and not being able to actually go into a dealership, to supply chain crisis, et cetera, et cetera. What I would say is we're starting to see the early trends saying that loyalty is slowly coming back to close to normal levels, but I wouldn't necessarily expect a straight line trend on that. And that's mainly because inventories are coming back, but not necessarily universally, right? There's some brands and some variability within some brands. So it's all about availability at this point. And it means some will gain and some will continue to lose. But loyalty isn't just about available vehicles. It's about the customer experience as a whole, right? OEMs and dealers need to continue to invest in a much better end-to-end experience. And you can point to a brand like Tesla as kind of a gold standard here. Obviously, they're a very different model because they don't have a dealer network, but the simplicity and ease of the experience is, when you look at consumers and the things that they say about the car buying experience, Tesla's at the top of the list in terms of that type of easy, understandable, very coherent. Like, this is what I'm getting. This is how much it costs. So we need to see the OEMs start to up their game on the experience side in order for loyalty to really be a winning strategy for them, right? It's not just about cars coming back. There's so much more to it that they have to improve on. And that's work that a lot of OEMs we're starting to see, start to invest in significantly, invest in ways to really enhance the data that they have about their consumers and really start to understand how to communicate with them. But it's a major work in progress for many of them to really understand that loyalty doesn't just equal cars available, it equals consumer experience from end to end, and that retention will happen. We've seen challenging times in history where OEMs have doubled down on the opportunity. I look back at Hyundai during the 2008 crash, where they came to the market with a lot of incentives and options and really just a consumer outreach plan that really help propel them to the brand that they are now. So these are times when it's an opportunity, and if you look at it as a crisis and a deficit, then you're not necessarily going to win on the other end of it. So loyalty is a fragile thing that needs to be taken very seriously by OEMs. And I think that's where the investment needs to start to come in.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about vehicle supply. Now maybe shift over to the demand side, and we've been hearing a lot about economic headwinds. Inflation has meant auto loan rates have jumped significantly, especially in used cars. And there are the conflicting reports of these massive tech layoffs, but also record low unemployment. So there's a lot of noise, macroeconomically speaking. So, Joe, are we starting to see demand destruction affecting car sales? And what does that mean for automakers and their dealers now that their supply chains are clearing, their manufacturing is cranking up again, inventories are on the rise, just in time for some economic headwinds to come into play?
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly one of those, interesting, unprecedented, never before seen kind of times. And I think there continues to be plenty of demand, and there's also a lack of supply for some vehicles still. But there's also all the things you said. There's consumer trepidation due to macroeconomic factors. Is there a recession coming? Am I going to lose my job? There's interest rates that have gone considerably higher than the last few years prior to that, where people were able to get, quote unquote, free money for vehicles, whether it's a lease or a purchase. So we're experiencing a time where in a lot of cases, a consumer would rather wait and see than pay the premium, and they're holding on to vehicles longer as a result. So what it really means ultimately for conquesting, right? When it comes to, hey, like if someone is wavering on buying another vehicle from the same OEM, that's an opportunity, right, for conquesting. And I would say it's very much open season right now. And due to the interest rate hikes and the lack of pricing flexibility in vehicles, and leasing is severely deficient compared to the past, almost half as much as it was just a few years ago. Consumers are at a point where they're looking to fulfill a need for the budget that suits them, which means the best brand wins. So there's a likelihood that incentives, assuming they come back, will become a lever to begin to win business and capture that demand. So it's got to be the right price and within the right budget for the consumer. Consumers are not splurging, and personalized incentives are becoming a much bigger opportunity as well with just some of the technological advancements with digital marketing. So the ability to really get personal about an individual, their need, their current situation, their current vehicle, garage content, it starts to really point to a very optimized approach to getting the right vehicle into the right hands.
Okay. So I think we need to move from talking about consumers as sort of an amorphous being into the individual level. And Grant's been super patient, sitting, waiting for his turn. So let's talk about what happened during the pandemic. And car shoppers became accustomed to, because they had no choice, to waiting for the car that they really wanted. It was weeks, sometimes months, rather than select from the few cars that were available on a dealer lot that day. We have a what's called the Vehicle Buyer Journey Survey that just came out, and it's showing some really intriguing data from that. And what we're seeing is when inventories come back to traditional levels, and they will, um, do you see this European style build to order consumer trend continuing with American shoppers? Or do you see a return to the instant gratification model that has defined the US retail market for decades?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So that really seems to be one of the questions of the year so far. I think that we're going to see sort of a rebalance. And if you looked at how people shop pre-2020, the vast majority of customers were buying cars already on the lot, basically figuring out what they wanted online, show up to a dealership, and drive off with the closest thing to it that you could find. It was really only in special cases where people ordering vehicles because of availability or because they wanted something specific that the dealer didn't already have. Then we hit the pandemic and all the obstacles that came with that over the last couple of years, and we saw this dynamic kind of flip on itself. So now there was nothing on lots, and people were ordering just to get any car. But in doing so, a side effect that we saw from this was that they were ordering exactly what they wanted. And our survey results showed that over half the people are okay with waiting over a month, and over a quarter, we're okay with waiting even more than 3 months. So I think that, like you just mentioned, because we didn't have a choice but to wait, we all kind of automatically became accustomed to it. And really, when we were forced over the last couple of years, we've gotten used to waiting. and we've gotten used to getting the exact vehicle that we wanted. So I think there's kind of two dynamics here playing off each other. So all of this said, I don't see this European style order and wait model going away anytime soon. But at the same time, like you mentioned earlier too, inventory is starting to come back up. And as they do improve, the people that want to drive something off the lot today will also be able to do that. So I really think OEMs and dealers will need to find the right balance and how to cater to both kinds of customers and work together to figure that out.
Okay, seems like we're starting to see a real sea change in how consumers are shopping for cars. Now, vehicle buyer journey was more than just about how long you're willing to wait. I'm sure there was other things that we unearthed during the survey process, right, Grant?
Yeah, there's so much we could talk about here, but for the sake of brevity, I'll try to keep it short. And like the name suggests, the survey was around the process that buyers are going through to buy a car and trying to measure how that process is changing and how different people are reacting to all the different parts of it. So Joe, you mentioned a few minutes ago, what I found was an interesting broad theme throughout this whole study was the shift in automotive to a digital car buying experience, and now the customer's expectations around that as it does begin to change. And it's really no surprise if you look at how we shop day to day, so much of it can be done online and so much more conveniently than we could before. Obviously, like an Amazon comes to mind first off, but also groceries. I mean, you can do so much stuff digitally now, and we're seeing it everywhere. So pretty much everything, including shopping, is quote smart now. So like I said, it does make a lot of sense that while everybody gets used to this in their daily lives, they'll start expecting it when buying cars too. I mean, why wouldn't they? And when it comes to those expectations, what people are telling us in this study is that this digital experience and this change that we're starting to see is not really a nice to have bonus that gets thrown in there if it exists. People are telling us that they're driving further and to unfamiliar dealerships to them in order to get that digital experience they're after. And another thing, while it's not strictly an online component, but really a convenience in the process we're hearing more about recently, is people taking advantage of things like home delivery test drives or experiencing a car or a brand at a low pressure test drive center or event. So just alternative ways to still get the feel for the car they're looking to buy without that all in dealership process. So that brings me to my last point that at least for now, customers do still want some kind of physical in-person touch point when buying their car. And this does include the younger buyer as well in that. But they want the inconvenient and unexciting things taken care of digitally more conveniently. And finally, to wrap this up, the majority of people who bought cars in 2022 that we surveyed said they expect their next purchase to be done fully online. So I really think we're going to see this retail transformation all the way to digital continue.
Okay, so we've been talking about the American consumer here, but one cool thing about the vehicle buyer journey survey is that it was international in scope, and we just got the translations back from our overseas affiliates. And I'm wondering, Grant, if there's any other post-COVID consumer trends in Europe or in Asia that run counter to what's going on here in America.
Yeah, for sure. I can speak to some of the high level trends we're seeing in these other markets. So there are a few interesting similarities between the US, Europe, and Asia throughout all the different things that we were just talking about. But really, when it comes to this study overall, we're seeing that Europe and China do have quite different shopping patterns than the US market. And especially in terms of their willingness to wait for the right car, their desire for test drives at the dealership as opposed to virtually at home, et cetera, and even differences in how they wish to perform their transactions online versus at the dealership.
Okay. So what we've been seeing in America is a very particular kind of transaction model with internal combustion vehicles. But when you look at another area that's going to require an evolution of how car dealers interact with American consumers is with electric vehicles. And while EVs are still a relatively small share of the US market and still in single digit market share, located mostly on the coasts, intelligent American car dealers are already looking to a future where 1 in 3 cars on their lot will be electrified. So I'm going to throw it back to you, Joe. When we start seeing mass market consumers shopping for EVs, how does that change the retail experience from the traditional internal combustion sales pitch?
Yeah, that's a question that we could spend hours on. But I think the answer is there's a lot of work to do here still, and I think the way it's starting is OEMs really using marketing and broad-based marketing for EVs to create more of a halo effect about their their future. And it's kind of like a look at me, look at how technically savvy we are approach to it. But consumers need to get more comfortable for these numbers to start to really penetrate the market for EVs. And the things they care about are not necessarily being addressed by OEMs or dealers at this point, because number one, dealers have very few electric vehicles on their lots these days, due to all the things we know about to this point. So they're not quite fully engaged at that level. But the things that consumers ultimately care about are things like charging. How do I install a charger in my home, and what do I need to do? The infrastructure, right? Can I go on a road trip and understand if it's going to die out on me or not? And safety. Safety is an important factor too for consumers. So there's an education component to this that really hasn't hit home yet, in order for there to be a comfort that then leads to all of the things that we ultimately experience in buying a car, which is you order a vehicle or you go to a dealership and you buy a vehicle, and the dealer can then take you through all of the features and functionality that answers all of your questions. And I don't think we're there yet. And there's a lot of investment that the OEMs are making in order to create that momentum, and the dealers are ultimately going to have to make as well. Some of the mandates have been put forth by the OEMs in order to support that, so that dealerships can become electrified and supported with charging stations, the educational component, to really entrust those sales individuals with the knowledge and know-how to give that consumer the comfort to walk away, drive away with one of those electric vehicles. So there is a lot of work to do here still.
Mark,
Okay,
I would
so
just add, if I can just
okay,
chime in there, I would just
please.
add, I think, part of it is the fact that they're selling electric vehicles, right? But I think the other part is they're approaching the market with a different model, more digital, more concierge, more customer experience. But if you look at, the EVs that are selling today with registrations, just round numbers, I mean, Tesla's at what, around 60% of US EV registrations, but the next 20% are traditional brands like Chevy, Ford, Volkswagen, Hyundai, Kia. They're doing a good job socializing, selling their EVs. Only, maybe 5% are those, Polestars, Rivian, Lucid that you're talking about, but it's their experience. So I think in addition to learning how to sell an EV, which everyone needs to overcome those challenges that Joe just mentioned, consumers would have those same, hesitations, whether they're buying a Rivian or, a Lightning. I think it's engaging, as Grant mentioned, in a more digital, customer-friendly, seamless, easy, yet still trustworthy way that the traditional OEMs are working on, and I would say need to work on more quickly before somebody gets comfortable with a new brand, right? You want to make your brand easy, sticky, drive loyalty through convenience, through customer-centric approaches before they go somewhere else and think, wow, this was super easy. And now you're trying to win a customer back. So I think that's the next level challenge, is selling to this new consumer, EV or not. It's a different world that they have to figure out.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would follow that and say I agree completely. And what you have is about 5 or 6% of the market of new car sales as EVs, and you could speak to that being a lot of first movers, people who are comfortable with new technology and want to jump into the next thing. But yeah, in order for the mainstream consumer to get to that point, that experience has to be really thorough and really easy for them to overcome.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done in crossing the chasm from those early adopters into the mainstream for sure. All right. Thank you to Kristen, Joe, and Grant for joining us today. And thanks to all of you for listening. That was a lot to unpack, but I hope you all feel smarter and more informed for having tuned in. And if so, please share this podcast link with your colleagues and social media accounts. And to opt in to our newsletter that provides more information on this topic and others, please visit spglobal.com/mobility. We'll be back with more Fuel for Thought next month.